grateful for medical technology. Had a bit of a minor procedure, a few weeks ago, and then resting up, recovering. A lot of pain meds and everything to help me through the process, but also the tech of it. Actually, amazing things that they can do with technology, but a concern that perhaps the tech doesn't, totally fill some of the social needs in our society. Joining me on the program now, guest contributor for the Maxim Institute, Prenter. Sean, kia ora, thank you for joining us today.
Ata mare. Good morning, Andrew. How are we doing?
Doing very well. Now, when it comes to, I suppose, embracing modern medical technology to help overcome medical incidents or disability, you've got some skin in this game, Sean. That's in some ways part of your story?
It absolutely is. To give some context for the listeners here, I personally didn't have any experience with disability. It was something that I probably viewed with a disconnection, sort of like looking through a frosted window, you might say.
Yep.
For me in 2019, that window shattered, as did the fragmented pieces of my able-bodied life. I sustained a traumatic brain injury down in Otago, falling from a rotten balcony.
Wow.
And so what I found is that prior to my disability, I viewed disability probably through a lens of maybe cure, certainly for distance when thinking about disabled people in society.
In terms of the tech, certainly there's a lot more stuff around. Thinking of Elon Musk and some of the groundbreaking technology there for people whose mobility is affected. Exciting times that we live in. How are you responding to some of the new stuff on the horizon here?
Well, I think certainly we should be absolutely excited. There is a huge possibility and potential here. So just on the smaller scale, for something that might be relatable to your listeners every day. For me, with a brain injury, using just voice to text and text to voice functions gives me back precious hours of my day navigating my brain injury.
Mm-hmm.
And you see some fantastic innovations too with Musk's Neuralink and the direction that might well be going.
Yep.
With a quadriplegic being able to control a computer with their mind. Like, fantastic and incredible stuff. I think my hesitation, and I think the point of reflection for where the direction we're going, something that really drew me to the Maxim Institute in the first place, was the boldness to facilitate conversations on AI, to make sure that we're not just sleepwalking into technology. So by way of example, we can consider the cochlear implant. So the cochlear implant was heralded as a way to cure deafness, to resolve what might be considered problematic to a non-disabled person. The problem with this, of course, was that the cochlear implant wasn't the cure it cracked out to be. In fact, the cochlear implant doesn't completely restore hearing. Certainly, we continue to make advances, and that's something we should be very encouraged by. But what it misses is that relational element. We need to think about how we're relating to one another. It's what was missed with the cochlear implant, because when those deaf students then went into the classroom, when they were mainstreamed away from deaf schools where there was New Zealand Sign Language interpretation, and to a culture that considered deaf learners, away from that, what we found is that deaf learners were isolated, that they were not learning at the same rate as their peers, and that social exclusion really affected the outcomes in the educational setting.
And certainly that is the case for physical disability as well as mental illness, and certainly within a generation, the way in which we've responded to mental illness has changed, mostly for the better, I would say. Having said that, though, as you say, relationally, a lot of people falling through the cracks, and we see the evidence of it in our communities.
Yes, we certainly do. I mean, if you just look at our recent census data, you find that disabled children are more than twice as likely to be in a low-income household. I mean, twice as likely is startling on account of their disability. And I think thinking about that relational element, it's important that your listeners understand a subtlety to appreciating that. So what's important to understand is that thinking about someone with a physical impairment, like you mentioned, say someone in a wheelchair, for example, certainly they might not have the function of their legs. They might not be able to stand for long periods of time, or they may not be able to stand at all. And they have a wheelchair for that. However, that's not the limit of their disability.
Yeah.
What's disabling is their environment, the social environment that we create. So for someone in a wheelchair where a ramp doesn't exist, for example, that too is something that's going to be disabling. So you can think about, for example, for education or in the workplace, trying to get to a lecture and there not being a ramp, and then being excluded on account of that. And then to the attitudes around that, thinking, well, if someone's in a wheelchair, they're disabled, they can't study or they can't work, when that's scarcely the case. It's really thinking more about how we design our society and how we relate to one another.
Yeah. And honestly, ramps will only get you so far. Yes, into the building, but the social aspect, I suppose, because there is, there's physical limitations with disability. In your case, as a result of an accident, your world changes at that point. But the way in which people respond to you, or perhaps even stop responding to somebody with disability, they can't go and visit people like they used to, and perhaps less people are visiting them because they're awkward. As I say, the machines only get us so far, but engaging as communities, not just being inclusive, but actively taking steps to invite people into conversation and relationship. These are the sorts of things that even the smartest AI isn't going to fix, right?
I think that's it. I mean, it's absolutely crucial. I mean, to dig a bit deeper into thinking about how we see that disconnect for disabled people, if we look at the 2008 financial crisis, what we see there is that disabled people were even worse affected. And that's because you have inaccessibility already for disabled people.
Yep.
You don't have the ramp, you have the attitude problems there. And sure, you have the effect of the impairment in addition to that. And it's important to hold those two pieces in balance. Take another example. So around thinking about sustainability, something that we did was we waged a war on plastic straws. Yep. And I'm far from saying that we should, continue using plastic in all domains. There is certainly a position that we need to hold in tension there around the damage that we can cause to sea life and emissions, and a larger conversation. But what's missed there, because disabled people themselves are already excluded from this conversation on account of those societal barriers.
Yep.
What's missed is that disabled people may well actually use straws for nutrition. Yep. It's often a safer, a more flexible material than we've otherwise invented. And so moving to a metal straw actually would be hazardous to some members of the disabled community. Yep. But that's lost in the lack of relation we have. So you can just imagine when we start to think about AI, disabled people being left behind from this conversation, not having the resources to engage with the technology and not being at the decision-making table or relating in the community to think about how these technologies are going to shape everything from our education to our workplace.
Is AI in itself a bit of a relational ramp, Sean? That the AI technology, particularly thinking for people with disability who are perhaps non-verbal or find it difficult to communicate or to use and access computers, is AI in itself a way of including or enabling the people with disability to be part of the conversation, or do we need that to be human-to-human contact? What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's either or. I think it's more of an and situation, right? Mm-hmm. I think a helpful way of thinking about that question is to consider the material hardship of disabled people. Absolutely, we can pay taxes, and governments can budget a certain amount of those resources towards disabled people to help with their material situation. Yeah. And that will take us so far. But what that misses is the relational aspect to disabled people. We are more than just individuals. We're more than just atoms floating in the air. Yeah. And so we need to think about how we relate beyond that. So contextualizing that to AI, absolutely, AI can give us further agency. It can empower us to be able to complete more tasks, as I mentioned with myself with the speech to text, and to the quadriplegic case with Mr. Musk. The tension there is, how do we then move that technology to be able to relate to one another? We already find that many individuals, disabled and non-disabled, are struggling with mental health, loneliness, and isolation. And so it's important that we don't deepen that when the disabled community are already experiencing those problems more acutely.
Yeah, and not just a disability to be solved, tick box, access is available, but looking at the social, psychological, and even spiritual aspects of a person and their identity. Sean, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. This is a fascinating article. We've just skimmed the surface of it. It is going to be published on the Maxim website, maxim.org.nz, a little bit later in the week. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you. Lovely talking to you, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.